All right, everybody, welcome. All right, tonight we've got a fantastic conversation prepared for you tonight. I'll introduce our speaker and moderator briefly so that we can launch straight into it. Tonight we have the privilege of having CNN senior correspondent Arwa Damon speak with us. Arwa has reported from the Middle East, from some of the most historic moments in the region, the Iraq War, the execution of Saddam Hussein, the Arab Spring, the Syrian War, and the Benghazi attacks. Tonight, we have the fantastic Martin Tan, our Straits clan member, who will be in conversation with Arwa. Many of you know Martin Tan. He also moderated a riveting conversation with Peter Piot, who covered epidemics, who we spoke to right as the COVID pandemic unfolded. And Martin is also the executive director of the Majority Trust, which is a philanthropic organization here in Singapore, doing some fantastic work, especially in these moments right now. All right. We also have Johan Tan to thank. Johan, you come say hello very quick.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. So many of you also know Johan Tan, who is one of our members. And fun fact, we can ask him about later. Johan was conceived in this building. Very long story. You can ask him about that later. And Johan is on the board of Inara, which is the humanitarian organization that Arwa heads up, and fantastically brought this to us so that we can highlight the humanitarian issues in that region. And at the end of this conversation, Martin and Johan will also share some of the ways you can support the work that Inara is doing, that Johan has been supporting as well. All right, so without further ado, I will hand it over to Martin Tan. And actually tonight, unlike many of our past conversations, this is not off the record. So you may share on Instagram, share any powerful quotes that you will certainly hear tonight. So over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Hope everybody's doing well. I think there's no camera on this time around. So nobody's turning on the camera. So
You're shy tonight.
Yeah, very shy. Hey, really warm welcome to everyone. It was really great to have Arwa with us. Arwa, thank you so much for spending time tonight with us. It's a fascinating time. So one of the things that we're going to spend some time talking about is your backstory. We're going to split tonight in 3 different segments. In segment 1, we're going to talk to Arwa about herself, her backstory. And then in the second segment, we're going to be really talking about the context in which our work is in relating to the world and the wars that's around us. And then finally, we're going to be talking about Inara. I'm going to be asking Arwa to share a little bit about it. Now, unlike the previous sessions that we had before, got muted. What we're going to be doing is to make sure that everyone has a chance to participate. So it's going to be Q&A right through the whole session. I'm going to moderate with her just a few times, but please do ask your questions through the chat function. We'll be watching over it. Straits Clan will be watching over it, and then we'll compile some of the questions for Arwa as we go. So let me see. Shall we spotlight Arwa, and then we can go. Arwa, can I just say this? Can I just say that it's such a privilege to be interviewing a correspondent? This is such a treat for me, which also makes it really, really scary for me. So please go easy on me, okay?
Oh, but let me just say, don't be scared, because I'm not used to being on this side of the camera either. So it's novel for me as well.
Very good. So we will have a lot of fun. Hey, when we talk about Arwa Damon, beyond who we watch on TV, on CNN, can you tell us a little bit about yourself beyond the camera?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. And thank you for hosting, and thank you all for joining. I'm actually really excited about this. So I actually like to think that the person you see on camera, like when I'm out there doing the reports, when I'm actually in the field, is my true self. Because I don't believe in trying to, hide or mask my genuine sort of gut reactions to situations, because then ultimately at the end of the day, if I'm too frigid or reacting unnaturally, that is going to build a barrier with the viewer. But I do think that, what a lot of viewers don't see, and this isn't just pertinent to me, but, everyone in our industry is kind of, how deeply and profoundly affected a lot of us are by what it is that we witness. And, we don't like talking about it because you feel as if you're feeling this pain, it becomes this complex thought process of what right do you actually have to feel it, because it's not your pain. This wasn't your experience. You went there by choice. So, get over it, move on. But the reality is that, even though it's not your pain, it's not easy, nor should it be easy to get over witnessing other people's pain. Because if you were able to turn your back on it so quickly, then that's almost, disrespecting the severity of what it is that they've been through. But it does have a very profound, psychological effect, I think, not just on myself, but on a lot of us. But we're all experts at masking that, not even just as journalists, but as human beings, generally speaking, we're not encouraged to show vulnerability or anything. And this is something that, what I'm saying to you tonight is not something that Arwa of 10 years ago would have admitted. But now I'm okay talking about this stuff because I no longer believe that, my feeling pain or struggling after reporting a story is somehow disrespectful to the people whose story I was covering. I think it's my way of carrying them with me. And every story you go out and you report on, especially from some of these more intense circumstances, you leave a piece of yourself there. And I think that's okay. And I kind of think that that's the way it should be.
And I love the idea of vulnerability as you grow in your occupation, in your life. I love the idea that this is you, this is what you leave out there. But you never started as a journalist. In fact, I think you studied biology, is that right?
I did. I was not one of those kids who, grew up and knew that she wanted to, have this as a career. I never really knew what I wanted to do. I studied biology and French. I minored in international affairs. I worked for a Turkish textile company in New York, actually, which is really just a fancy way of saying I sold bathrobes and towels. Yeah, no, I actually did that. Literally zero business experience, but they wanted someone who spoke Turkish, and I'd grown up in Turkey, so I spoke Turkish, who could kind of speak to the US market. And we had this client named New York Dog, and so we used to do like doggy bathrobes.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's very different to kind of where I found myself right now. But the interesting thing with, journalism, especially when it comes to sort of, I think, reporting and also, producing, is a lot of it it's common sense. I mean, yes, of course, there's the do's and the don'ts, but then a lot of it is common sense. And especially when you're focusing on the human story, I mean, there's no magic to the kinds of questions I ask people I'm interviewing. It's a genuine curiosity about, the other person and their life that, a lot of us naturally have with each other. And it was really interesting for me, though, because I never really knew what I wanted to do until the first day I actually dipped my toe into journalism. And then it was this big epiphany of, wow, this is what I need to do with my life. But I was older. I was 24, 25 at the time.
Cool. But is there a trigger? I mean, you went into journalism like shortly after 9/11, if I read correctly. So was 9/11 the trigger, or was there something else that really moved you in the direction?
No, it was definitely 9/11. And look, for a bit of background, my mother is Syrian, my dad's American. I grew up bilingual, speaking Arabic and English. We moved to Morocco when I was 6. We moved to Turkey when I was 10. So I grew up very international, multilingual, very fortunate in a household that was, deeply immersed into both cultures. And then I went back to the US for college. And I went to a small college. And I think throughout that experience, I realized that because I look so American, mind you, my mom actually wanted a brown-haired, brown-eyed boy and ended up with 2 blonde daughters who don't look that much like her. But I do look, I look very American. I look very Western. and I can talk to the West in a way that maybe is more palatable to them. But I am deeply bicultural. If anything, like as an upbringing and as kind of what I relate to, I relate more to the East.
I see all these.
I realized in college, speaking to, you know, my friends who normally wouldn't necessarily be interested in what's happening in the Middle East, but, you know, I'm from there, blah, blah, blah. And they would grow curious and they would start reading articles about what was happening. So when 9/11 happened and I'm sitting, you know, in New York and my towel company, you know, watching the towers go down and then seeing the way it just polarized, literally the two sides of me, that was the biggest catalyst for me to go and actually try to do something about it, albeit naively perhaps, but to at least try to, you know, explain people to each other to a certain degree, because I am both. And so both sides of me were going to war.
That constant tension, do you still feel that today?
Yes, I do. I do, because, you know, unfortunately, the situations in the Middle East have not died down. Globally speaking, you know, societies, cultures are becoming more polarized. People are becoming more polarized towards one another, whether, you know, we're talking about the refugee crisis that happened, you know, back in 2015, or we're, you know, even looking at what's happening in the US right now. You know, we are globally speaking becoming more insular, more inward looking, and we have less tolerance for others' pain and less compassion for it. At least that's the way it feels a lot of the time. And I think not just for me, but also for a lot of my colleagues, you know, we feel as if when it comes to certain issues, we bear a burden of responsibility for that, that it's somehow our failure, because, you know, you believe that if you go out and you report a story, and let's take Syria as an example, you know, things are supposed to change in a positive direction. When there's awareness, there is supposed to be a positive reaction. When people are dying, when atrocities are happening, there is supposed to be some sort of a reaction to that that is meant to bring about an end. And obviously in the case of Syria, that didn't happen. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, journalism is all about creating and generating awareness. And yet, despite that, we are seeing this deeply, deeply divided world. So that's, you know, another thing that I think people don't necessarily know about me or about the media, is how much of that burden of responsibility we feel. And I can't speak for all my colleagues, but I know that, you know, many of them and I feel it very profoundly.
I want to expand a little bit on that burden, because I think sometimes when we watch the news and when we see journalists bringing the issues right at our screens, right? It's no longer just on our TV screens, now on our mobile, on our computer, and so on. And I can imagine that the burden is real. But one of the questions that came from the chat group is that in this era of fake news, in this era of misinformation, how do you carry that burden? Because sometimes it's almost a lose-lose situation. Well, you're trying your darnest best to bring the right information. At the same time, you're combating all the misinformation. And often it's the governments that are at play, or people that are at play they are trying to reach out to. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it scares me, to be honest. Like the whole fake news phenomenon, the discrediting of journalism and journalists, I mean, that's scary, because what does the world look like if we cease to exist? And then you do have all this information out there. You have, you know, social media and citizen journalists. And then you have the fake accounts that are spewing out the fake news. And the thing that you realize about the human psyche is that if a falsity gets repeated often enough and enough people repeat it without significantly questioning it, it becomes real. And that scares me. And I think we're actually, I mean, we're entering a new era, as journalists, where we are ending up having to fight on multiple fronts. We have to fight to get to a story. We have to fight to be able to report that story. Oftentimes, it's governments or other entities that are, pushing back against us. We have to fight against, on social media or through other means, individuals or governments or entities that are trying to discredit what it is that we're doing. And so it's become this multi-layered, minefield that, my generation at least, didn't necessarily experience when we were first starting into all of this. But I do also believe that is why it makes what it is that we're fighting for even more important. I mean, no one out there is going to turn around and tell you that they're about to give up on journalism because it's become harder. And it has. But if anything, I mean, we're a kind of breed that rises to a challenge. And I'll just speak about myself personally right now is, I don't, unfortunately, maybe for my own brain, I don't know how to give up. And so I'll just keep fighting.
And how about the rest of your colleagues?
A lot of them are like that too. I mean, look, it's very frustrating, and we do talk about this or something who doesn't like what we're reporting or what perspective we have. There's online harassment. Sometimes it does bleed over into something more serious. But I think, when you believe in what journalism is meant to be, even if it might shift off of that, you still fight to try to shift it back. And look, we're also going to have to adapt. I mean, mainstream media is not what mainstream media was 20 years ago, because there's so many different avenues for people to get information. You don't just watch the half-hour news spot or the hour-long news spot. There's so many different ways. So we're also going to have to adapt and shift in the way that we do the news. But I think the bottom line is we're not going to shift in the way that we tell the news and in the way that we continue to, pursue the real truth, because there is no such thing as an alternate truth.
Yeah.
There are alternate perspectives, but there's no alternate truth. And we can't let our moral compass break. I mean, look, we know right and wrong. We do. We fundamentally do.
Please do not give up.
I know. I don't worry. I won't. I'm really good at, like banging my head into a brick wall.
We need journalists more than ever, especially at this time. I mean, one of the questions that I like that some of the clan members have put up, it's really the idea of a role model. When you talk about not giving up, you talk about it with tremendous passion, with tremendous tenacity. In your journalism career, is there like a role model that you look up to and say, hey, you know what, I really think that's the kind of journalist I really want to be?
Marie Colvin.
Can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, of course. And, for people who don't know Marie, I mean, Marie is like, for me, she was, a goddess, larger than life. She was a print journalist. She lost her eye in Sri Lanka, I want to say. She had a rough go at it with journalism. She had her own emotional demons, and she was extraordinary. I mean, she never gave up on a story. Like, she had these insane things happen to her where she ended up stranded on a mountainside and then had to get pulled out because she refused to leave when her editors wanted her to. And she stuck there, and she really, really focused her reporting on the human story. She was killed in 2012 in Baba Ahmed in Syria, along with Remy Ochlik, the French photographer. And I was there with her a few days before that actually happened. I had gotten into Baba Ahmed a few days before her and her photographer, Paul. We've been there for a few days, and Marie and Paul had showed up. And by the way, to get into Baba Ahmed back then, it was, this tiny little rebel-held enclave in the city of Homs in Syria. And to get there, you had to, sneak across the Lebanese border. You jumped multiple safe houses. It took 6 days to get there versus literally, on normal circumstances, it would take you 2 hours. And then the last leg of it was crawling through this sort of no longer in use sewage tunnel. That was a bit like jumping in Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole, because you literally popped into a hole and then you kind of were hunched over for about 2 hours to get through this tunnel. And the reporting there, it was constant shelling. There were families and women giving birth in underground bunkers and makeshift medical hospitals. And I knew Marie because I'd seen her, we cover a lot of the same things. And when she showed up, I always get tongue-tied around Marie because it's like, it's her approval that I want, like on a report. And so then after she was there for about 24 hours, the sort of rebels and media activists that we were with got word that, the army of Bashar al-Assad is coming and we all need to evacuate. So we all evacuated back out. And as we were, schlepping back out through the sewage tunnel and trying to crawl on our hands and knees, and it was snowy or sleeting and muddy and wet, and we kept slipping and falling on top of each other. So then we end up in this truck, and I'm sitting up front with Marie and the truck driver, and Marie and I are just covered in mud. And I'm translating for her with the truck driver, and she looks at me and she says, if people could see 2 top reporters like us in this situation, they would just laugh. And I was like, thank God it's dark, because I turned like 50,000 shades of, bright red, purple, you name it, because all that went off in my head was, oh my God, Marie Colvin just put me in the same category as herself. Yeah.
That is super awesome.
Yeah, and she had little things about her that I found out later. Like, she planted her garden so that something was always in bloom. And I've tried to do that. She always wore sexy lingerie no matter where she went, just so that she felt like she had her own secret. I haven't gone that far.
I was about to ask.
No, I haven't. But I do now pay attention to what my underclothes are, just in case someone ever needs to cut my clothes off.
I just want to say, hearing your story of your day in our office for you, my day was just trying to get my staff to do some work.
Well, how'd that go for you?
Well, I didn't have mud on my clothes.
Well,
Different world. Hey, Arwa, thank you. We're gonna come back very shortly. We thought it'll be good for members to be able to see her in action. So we're gonna actually play a quick clip about Arwa on CNN. Which should come up very soon.
The road to Mosul is painstaking, etched with violence and agony. It's heartbreaking that some families are still here. Noor was accepted into university, but she never went. Her younger brother, Saif, is paralyzed with fear, cowering with his mother in the back. We're in ISIS territory, and on the soldiers' faces, nerves begin to show. We realize we're trapped. Vehicles, wreckage, everywhere.
We need to go in this house. Huh? Go, 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 go. In there.
حسيت انا عمرت داعش تتراوى طلع
Fatima, she's just 16. She probably won't ever walk again, but no one has the heart to tell her. And she still has dreams of being a doctor. It's 5 days after multiple airstrikes hit this once quiet neighborhood in Idlib province, killing dozens of people.
هذا نايف، هذا عمره 3 سنين. هذا قطعة من قلبها. هي لغادة. ولغادة. غادة راحت وهي لغدير.
Only one of Ibrahim's 5 children survived. It's just memories now. Roads throughout the province are clogged with the traffic of those on the run. Many have been displaced multiple times before, but this time it's different. They feel like no matter what they do, they won't be able to outrun the war. These children walked for 7 hours in the middle of the night to get away from the bombing near their village, but it's not far enough. People wounded are rushed into this hospital, the only functioning one in the area. The strike was close by. Rana thought she would be able to keep her children safe. They fled their home to another village, but it wasn't far enough. Her son's face etched with wounds, hers with a mother's pain too deep for words. He was pulled out from under the rubble, but 2 of her other children, they were killed. One was 9 and one was 5.5, she tells us, unable to say more. In the same room, Buthaina looks on helplessly at her son, just 4 years old, injured in the same strikes that day. Humanitarian organizations are warning Syria is on the brink of a nightmare. Those who are living it will tell you that that nightmare began a long time ago. What they're about to enter is an even darker realm, one that defies logic and imagination.
Wow. Our images haunt us. When you look back, when I'm watching this video again, this clip again, and I know you've seen it multiple times, what goes through your mind? What goes through a mind of a journalist who covered those firsthand in a war zone?
I actually have a bit of a lump in my throat because I'm remembering. I remember all of them. I remember all of those moments. I remember all of those interviews, and I remember walking away. And it's hard. And I remember. I mean, what difference did that reporting make in these people's lives? And that's what we struggle with a lot. I mean, it's because it's not enough. It's not good enough. Whatever it is that we're doing, it's not good enough. And that haunts me. And that haunts a lot of us. And, I've kind of shifted my thinking, over the years that I've been reporting from, my naive ideals when I was starting out of, journalism is going to change the world, to realizing that we go and we report those stories, even though it might not make a difference, because we will not let the winners define and rewrite history. Those moments have to be recorded. And I remember all of them. I remember that mother sitting by her child's bed in the hospital in Idlib, and there was a bombing that happened, fairly close by, and then the injured came in, and then I think there was another bombing that was close by, so we ended up leaving. I mean, that's such a luxury. Like, we don't realize these luxuries that we have that are as simple as, the luxury to leave or be able to take your kid to a hospital and not worrying about it getting bombed again, or that father who we met who was just going and picking through the rubble of his house, pulling out the clothing of his dead children, or, those snippets at the top, the very beginning of that clip with all the intense kind of, like gunfire and explosions going off. I mean, that's when the Iraqi unit we were with in Mosul was ambushed. And we ended up basically alongside 30 wounded soldiers and just 6 that weren't wounded, effectively under siege by ISIS for about 28 hours before backup was able to, break through and get to us. And in that moment, I mean, I don't remember, and this is what may be interesting, is I don't remember the fear, like that's not the first memory. I don't remember the violence, but I remember the people I met. Because in some of my most kind of, scariest moments, I mean, things that seem absurd take place. Like when that siege was happening by ISIS and, a whole bunch of us, like me, my cameraman, Brice, we were all kind of taking shelter inside this one home. And so you had the head of the household, the father, and like I think 2 of his male relatives who were kind of out in the courtyard, and there were bleeding soldiers everywhere, and my cameraman had a head wound, and there's gunfire just on the other side of the wall. And his family, the women and children, like his immediate family and then his relatives, were hiding in this room in the back. And I remember sticking my head into that room and just seeing the whites of their eyes in a dark corner. And in the middle of all this craziness, he goes and he makes us all fried eggs, because at the end of the day, we were guests in his house, and that's Iraqi culture. And that's all that was left, kind of, it becomes the psychology of, how do I hold on to my dignity and who I am? I have guests. I'm going to welcome them. So I remember those moments.
Those are powerful moments that we would never know. I mean, you started your career just post 9/11, and you have. I like to phrase it this way: you've seen it almost every major conflict. You have been there: Iraq, Mosul, Arab Spring, name it. You were there. In this, I would say, 20 years.
I realized I was getting that old.
What has changed in the concept of war or the concept of conflict, in your opinion? You have been a front row of history in the making, right? So Do you think it has changed? How has it changed?
I think, so with the war in Iraq, especially with the rise of what was then Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then all of the different Shia militias, and granted, this was my first experience was that, but the sort of, relatively speaking, kind of immunity that journalists had was eradicated. So in a lot of other conflicts, the previous generation of, journalists would tell me about how, you could jump front lines and, you could go report from one side, then go report from the other side. And there was kind of an understanding that, you're a journalist and you're there doing your job. Not to say that journalists weren't targeted. Of course they were, but it was a completely different level than what it is that we're seeing today. And, with the war in Iraq, we had a target on our backs. There was, reward money that was out there for killing a journalist, and it changed based on, nationality and, kidnapping and, what have you. So there was that element of it. And then the wars themselves became more opaque in the sense that they became, if it's even possible, but it became dirtier. It became, this competition of, it's almost as if the value of civilian life, decreased significantly. And as the years have gone on, at least from my experience in the places I've been reporting from, the human life has completely and totally lost all value.
Wow. And I'm just letting you soak in.
Yeah, no, and then also, the politics of it, this multi-dimensional, multi-tiered, regional or global political chess game. I was talking to a friend of mine, I think last night or the night before, and I've said this before, and others have too, but it really is as if, the key leaders just are playing that game like Battleship or Warship or whatever it's called, and just moving pieces on a chessboard. well, in this conflict, I'm going to back that side. So in this conflict, you're backing this side. So can we, these trades that are happening, the way that money and national interests, trump to a certain degree what the right thing to do should be. I mean, it's very hard to kind of, especially for me, when to pull back and kind of look at everything that I've been through and everything I see and all the kind of moving parts that I see and be at all optimistic about where we're going.
One of the questions that I like that's coming up is this whole idea, how do you find real truth in a war zone like Syria and Iraq? And especially at the backdrop of what you have just said, right? It just becomes so much more opaque. Both in the world that is peaceful, is opaque as well. But in a war zone like that, how do you report truth? How do you find truth?
I mean, and that's a very good and a very valid question. Also, keeping in mind that, we really only have access to one side of that story. And by that, I mean, you can try calling the Syrian government for a reaction, but you're not going to get any. You're not going to get a statement. Journalists rarely get access to report from regime-held Syria. I'm able to go into rebel-held Syria, but even that's not free access. We need permission from the Turkish government to cross the border because technically it's a closed border, et cetera, et cetera. And so oftentimes, we might not know if it was a Syrian regime, fighter jet, or if it was the Russians. I'm talking specifically about Idlib right now, that carried out a certain bombing. And yes, there are people on the ground who are now trained and experienced, and they can identify certain things. And the rebel units, this is in one of my other reports that wasn't part of that clip, but they've set up this thing where they've kind of hacked. They've hacked in, and so they're able to hear the Russian pilots' conversations with each other. And so based on that, they can kind of determine who actually carried out the strike. But the thing is when I go in, for me, that part of it almost doesn't matter, because this is what I know. I know a bombing took place. I know there used to be a house there or a hospital there that no longer exists. And I know, because I am directly speaking to civilians that have been wounded in that. I'm speaking directly to, I'm speaking directly to children that have been infected by that. And so there's certain truths that are undeniable. A child's psychological trauma is undeniable. The fact that a family was forced to flee and is terrified is undeniable. And so for me, especially because I do try to build my reporting around the human story, a person's experience is their experience. There's no debating that.
But is there an issue of neutrality then? Because you're reporting from the experience of an individual on one side, how do you address, and one of the questions about how do you sustain your neutrality as you go to the rebel bases, as you talk to the rebels, as you talk to the government, as you talk to the military, how do you sustain a level of neutrality, being both torn inside the conflict that we talked about, the personal experiences that you're reporting on, and the information is coming left, right, center at you. So how do you maintain and sustain that neutrality?
So neutrality, objectivity, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you remain that?
Yeah.
I don't believe in objectivity or neutrality. And let me elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Because that is actually a very subjective thing. I mean, nobody is capable of being completely and totally objective looking on a situation. We all have our own thoughts. We all have our own emotions. And there are certain situations that are happening, which again goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is there's certain things that are undeniable, right? So I'm not going to sit there in my report and say something that I haven't personally seen. And it doesn't matter that if I'm taking, an entire situation and diluting it to one person's story, that's not losing what's happening's credibility, because the whole concept of neutrality and objectivity is to a certain degree obsolete. It's not about being neutral or objective. It's about being fair. right? It's about being fair. And part of being fair is about being fair to the story and being fair to what it is that the people that you're meeting are actually experiencing and going through. Obviously, when you go into these situations, it's not about maintaining objectivity or neutrality. It's about maintaining your ability to constantly question what is being told to you and what is happening. Look, even in those certain circumstances, I mean, some situations, it's undeniable what happened. The kid's covered in blood. He just got pulled out from underneath the rubble. We've seen it from start to finish, or we've seen a video that shows this from start to finish. We know that happened. If we can't verify who was actually responsible for that, we're going to say that we don't know who was responsible for this. But the undeniable truth is a child that should not have been a victim was a victim.
Yeah.
And so, that's the perspective that I have on that issue.
Have you
and
ever
then also there's this moral compass. There's right and wrong.
Yeah.
And again, back to what we were talking about earlier, we know what is right and what is wrong. There is no circumstance under which it is right to kill civilians who are in a school or a hospital or in a civilian neighborhood.
Yeah. Do you see more of that now compared to the past?
Yes.
And
yes, because there's less accountability on a global level. These things happen and they get condemned, but that condemnation does not actually result in anything, because this again goes back to the politics of the way that we have built our world and our society, where if it's going to cost country X too much to go out and try to, pressure country Y, country X isn't going to do it because our moral compass is broken.
We have an hour and a half, and I know I'm trying to push and get a few of the questions in, but I do want to talk a little bit about and to make it more personal in the story of Yusuf, the 5-year-old boy that we talked about, and the reason why I thought we should really just segue into Yusuf is because this whole context of right and wrong, this whole context of neutrality, objectivity, and I like the way you phrase it, right? It's like you report from the realities on the ground that you see, and what it means and what matters to people. Often for us as viewers, all we see are the commentaries, all we see are what's in front of our screens. We don't see the inside scoop, so to speak. So I thought if we could tell us a little bit about Yusuf. I found this story to be fascinating.
So I'm sure all of you know by now that I'm quite cynical and a bit, down on humanity. And this is, something that's evolved, but not necessarily something new. Point being is that, so back in 2007, I was living out of our Baghdad bureau and reporting on Iraq. And back then, the Iraq war had been going on for 3-4 years. It's harder to get the Iraq story on air. People were tired of listening to it, And this father, Wissam, comes into our CNN bureau. And I remember this very clearly because he met with our producer, Mohammed. And Mohammed pulls me aside because I was about to run up the stairs to do a live broadcast. And he says, Arwa, stop, look. And he shows me a photograph of Yusuf. Yusuf is Wissam's son. He was 5 years old. He had masked men pour gasoline on his face while he was standing outside his own home and set him on fire. And I looked at this photograph on the phone and I just stopped in my tracks. I looked at his father. I looked at Mohammed. I was like, I have a live shot in 2 minutes. It's like, we're doing this story. Don't even ask me what I reported on that day or how the words came out of my mouth. I have no idea. And so Yusuf came into our office with his family a few days later for us to do this interview with him. And I remember he was sitting in the kitchen of our CNN Baghdad bureau. And the scarring on his face was so severe that his face was like a mask of rivers of hardened scar tissue. and he couldn't open his mouth. So he was eating rice, one grain at a time, kind of just shoving it between his lips. And I said to his family, I was like, listen, like, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the reaction is going to be. People don't really care about Iraq right now. And we put the story together, and I was shaking. And then, I mean, the most extraordinary thing happened, because the more the story broadcast, I mean, my email blew up. CNN's phone was ringing off the hook. I mean, people from all over the world wanted to help this little boy. And, you know, he ended up going to, I mean, the best phone call I made was, so a couple of organizations came forward, and, you know, they said, you know, we'll take on this case. And CNN was looking for ways that they could, you know, raise money from our viewers, because everyone wanted to donate. And the best phone call I've made to date is when I called his parents and I said, your kid's going to get help. And he ended up going to the Children's Burn Foundation in Los Angeles and, you know, getting, you know, multiple surgeries. The family's still out there. You know, they're American now. Precious moments I went through with them, and I'm still in touch, and I still go and I still visit. And so, you know, fast forward over the years, and the extraordinary thing is that Yusuf today does not remember the attack. He used to be able to tell you about it, but Yusuf today doesn't remember. All he remembers is people being kind and compassionate to him, and generous to his family, and loving. It completely altered the balance of his psyche, and that was extraordinary. And so, you know, his is a story that really, you know, it defined me. I mean, I used to say, you know, if getting this kid help is the culmination of my career, I am perfectly fine with that. You know, and it kind of charted my future.
It's a defining moment, isn't it?
It was. For me, it really was, because I was very cynical. I was very down on, you know, humanity. And then all of a sudden, this outpouring of support. And I was so taken back by it. And our Iraqi staff, like, if you could have seen the reaction on their faces, you know, they thought no one cared about them. And the fact that so many people, you know, came together to donate so much money for this Iraqi kid to be able to go to America and, you know, get his surgeries and get this opportunity. I mean, it meant so much to them, even though it wasn't related to them, to just know that people out there were still willing to reach out a helping hand or, you know, donate.
I want to really talk about Inara, because I think Yusuf is such a sad story. When it all started, it's just a terrible thing to happen to a kid. And the good that can come out of it, because people do help. And I'm also very mindful we have only about half an hour, and between the two of us, I think we can have this whole conversation that I've got a whole
I was going to say, it's going by really fast.
Yeah, it is. And I've got a whole list of questions that I want to squeeze in as well, but I really want to make sure that we can talk about Inara. I know you have a video that you have prepared for us. Why don't we start with the video on Inara, and I'm going to bring back Yusuf later on as we talk a little bit about why you do what you do. So if you have the video ready, why don't you show it to us?
Okay, perfect. Hang on a sec. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries.
No, I've never done one of these where the media actually works the way it's supposed to.
It never does, especially in the live situation. It never really does.
Inara is a direct reflection of my experience for more than 15 years reporting from war zones.
احكي له شو كنت تروح تجيبي؟
انت عم تعملي؟
شو كنت تروح تنسخري لنا تجيبي؟ احكي.
I was constantly coming across wounded children whose parents either didn't know that certain forms of medical help existed, or they just didn't know how to access it, or it just didn't exist at all. And in 2007 in Iraq, I had met a little boy named Yusuf. His father had gone door to door looking for help. He was 5 years old, and he had had gasoline dumped on his head by unknown masked men, and he was set on fire.
Hi everybody, I'm Arwa Damon's founder, and this is Yusuf, the young man who inspired Inara.
And so Yusuf eventually ended up going to the Children's Burn Foundation in Los Angeles. And I think in that moment, I realized that there was a bigger way to connect children who need help with those who can help, with then the individual that wants to also support what it is that they're going through.
After 5 years of existence, Inara is the world's only organization that deals purely with the reconstruction of war-wounded children. That amount of experience and expertise, not only in the clinical needs of the child, but also the social needs of the family and the organization of such treatment, and the ability to project the needs of these families long-term. Means that Inara is at the moment, unfortunately, in Lebanon, best placed to be able to reach out to the families of these wounded children.
So in treating the child, you're also alleviating some of that pressure, that psychological pressure that is on the parents. You're allowing the parents to also once again breathe. You're giving them back moments that were stolen from them with their children, who they can see laugh and smile, in some cases speak again, run around again. I mean, that's transformative for a parent. That's transformative for the entire family.
That is so powerful. Truly, truly powerful. You can help them with their past, but you can build them a better future. I really, really like that. Arwa, in August, you wrote a CNN op-ed, and I want to quote your first opening line. You said, "I am angry at the trajectory of our evolution as a species. I am angry at us that we created a world where being a humanitarian is a thing and not the norm." That was your opening line in the CNN op-ed. How angry are you?
Very, because I believe that we can do better by each other, and too many of us are choosing not to. And that makes me angry, because I've seen what happens when people come together. I see it in, the strangers who donate to my charity. I see it in the way that in the aftermath of the Beirut explosion, people from all over the country came in to clean up and help out where the government was nowhere to be seen. I see these small acts of kindness all the time, and yet collectively speaking, too many of us make this choice to not actually be more kind and more compassionate. And the reason why I say this with such conviction is that if we were kinder, if we were better, if we were more compassionate, if we were as a collective less selfish, less greedy, the world would not be where it is today. And yes, that makes me angry, because we can do better. We can be better on every single level. So why aren't we? Why do we let this other side, this be what collectively defines us? I mean, honestly, I don't get it. I don't.
Is this the anger that started Inara?
It's frustration. It's a sense of helplessness. It was, I launched Inara when Syria, 2012, and Syria very quickly kind of shifted into that phase that Iraq was in of, oh, it's too complicated. We don't want to hear about it. It's too much death. And so I couldn't sleep. I literally wasn't sleeping, because I was remembering the Yusuf story, because he effectively is what inspired me to start Inara, and how, wait a minute, but all these strangers came together to help this kid. And, I was coming across all these children who needed help. And, sometimes you can do a report on a child, and a lot of the times you can't, for whatever reason it is. So I know someone who knows a doctor, and you ask your friends for money and you figure it out for them. And look, this isn't something unique to me. A lot of my colleagues do this. They do this as well. Sorry about that. But a lot of my colleagues do this as well. And, they wanted to help out. They wanted to do more. And so why not start a charity, this umbrella organization that can actually do more, that can plug together the kids who need help with the organization that can help, where people can actually, I am so sorry.
It's okay. Is there someone visiting you?
No, I don't have no idea why someone's ringing my doorbell.
Your cat is at the door. For those of us where I was answering the door, please keep your questions coming. As you probably realize by now, what I'm trying to do as in our conversation is to just put in the various questions that you guys have, and just reframing it. If I don't ask that question, so please just re-ask it, so that it's always on my chat. And we will put in as much of our questions together for Arwa as possible, okay? Arwa, back to you. You okay?
Yeah. Sorry. It's just a delivery. Anyways, so yeah, basically, why not create this organization that could actually bring together all these different moving parts? Because here's the thing, no matter how cynical I get, no matter how down on humanity I get, there are those of us who are good, who want to do good. The kindness of strangers does exist, even if it is hard for me to see at times. Children who need help are out there, and there are ways that can help. Look, I'm in a privileged position because I have all these different connections. I can do something. I can do something more than just report the news. And so that's what I had to do. And that's why I started Inara, because I had this idea. I knew that there was more that could be done. There was an obligation to do more. It wouldn't let me go. I wasn't sleeping.
not all your colleagues are like you, though. There is this, I mean, as journalists, you are at the front end, you see this, and we talked about this earlier about being neutral, about the emotional conflict and so on. But this has become personal for you. It's become really, really personal for you.
Yeah, it is, because
what's transition? What one?
Look, I don't think that there is a conflict of interest between having a human reaction to something, even as a journalist. Like, for me, those two things, they're not mutually exclusive. I am a human being and I am a journalist. And when I see tragedy in front of me, I am going to react as a human being. And, yes, of course, not everyone goes out and starts charities and that sort of a thing. But again, this goes to a position of privilege. Like, I could do something more about it. I had the means to do something more about it. I don't have kids. I don't want kids. So I have that flexibility, in my time and, in my money. And when I was getting Inara going at first, what happened, chicken or the egg? Do you start the organization, then try to apply for money? Do you apply for money, then start it? I couldn't wait anymore. I was able to, get us going by, self-funding for a bit. And yeah, look, for me, if my reporting career, I used to say it was a story of Yusuf, that was going to be the culmination of it. I think the culmination of my reporting career, hopefully, is Inara, because Inara isn't just about, in the future, it's not just about Syria or Iraq. We want to go global, because no child should have to suffer through that sort of violence that we're seeing, because adults, we, frankly, are failing continuously over and over and over again.
In the time that we got to know each other, and it's really hit me now when I watch news that what we see sometimes, we fail to comprehend the damage and the anguish it does on people, and especially on children. I particularly like the Inara's focus on the mental well-being of children. I can't imagine what these kids are going through. You meet with them, you see them. Of course, there's a story of Yusuf, and Yusuf is one of many, many different stories. How is it like for the children in a war zone, or in a devastation like in Peru recently?
The kids have that spark in their eye, right?
Yeah.
Like that spark of childhood and childhood innocence and that kind of giddy happiness.
Yeah.
You don't see that in the eyes of kids in war zones. That's the best way that I know to describe it. But the thing is you can see it come back. And that's the beauty of altering a child's reality. That's the beauty of what Inara does. When you change that balance of their psyche from one that was defined by, evil and abandonment and cruelty and struggling and watching their parents, struggle and be unable to help them, and watching, their family, everything begin to unravel, all these factors that kill that spark. But the thing is the spark is not, it's gone, but it's not dead. And so you can give it back. When you give that kid back, they know, no matter how young they are, they know what it means to get, medical help, because that's going to help fix their injury, and they're going to be able to go back to school, and they're going to be able to learn. So a lot of our kids also, if they are in school, they get bullied because of their injuries. Getting medical treatment, getting psychological support restores their confidence. It gives them that spark back. And there is nothing, like literally nothing more beautiful than seeing a kid, because, I go and I see them and I meet them over and over again, get that spark back.
I love that. I love how you describe it, getting the spark back. We are not there with you. We are not there in the front lines. How can we help?
Look, there's a number of different ways. And I think, and this is why I'm so appreciative of, this opportunity. It's about, listening and learning and, teach yourself about what's happening, because, what happens over there is not over there anymore. We all, and I think coronavirus taught us this, our lives are a lot more interconnected than we might have realized or been fully aware of. And the other thing also, I feel that, coronavirus ironically had an impact on is the individual psyche. So those of us who have, running water and we can afford soap and face masks, we began to think about people who couldn't. We began to think about, wow, like this was scary for me. What if I was going through it, in a war zone or in a refugee camp or in a slum? And so I think, ways to help are, talk about what's happening. Try to think of what you're seeing on the news and the stories you're seeing on the news and what's happening in terms of your own context, because there are so many things that bind us together. And then of course, if you can, donate, help out. Yes, we're talking about Inara here, and yes, we desperately need donations. I don't know how we even made it through COVID. I had to slash staff salaries because all of our fundraisers were canceled. But we somehow did, and our staff has been incredible. But, if you don't want to donate to us necessarily, find, something else in your area, in your neighborhood, or, volunteer somewhere. We all have a lot. I'm not saying, give away everything you've got, but there are little things that you can do. And then, on an even more minuscule sense, how, like, if you're kind of in a bad mood and then, someone random says, hey, how are you? Or I just wanted to, is a bit nice. It kind of fixes your mood, or it can set the tone for your day. Be aware of how you're interacting with people around you, and don't underestimate the impact of positive action. And I say this a lot. A lot of people feel as if, what's happening is too big and too overwhelming to really make a difference. Do not underestimate the impact of small acts of kindness, whether it's, a small comment or pausing where you necessarily wouldn't pause, or whether it's even a small donation. Because the only way we're going to fix this crazy place that we work on is by these small little steps. Because at the end of the day, governments are going to keep failing us. And the only way we're going to save ourselves is if we actually stop failing each other.
Now that's a really good way of phrasing it. And I think what you have just described, it's applicable to problems big and small. And it's not just the kind of catastrophe that you face, but even now, as we are experiencing COVID in all the different countries that we're in, sometimes all it takes is really just someone to say hi to someone else. Yeah. And that little bit makes all the difference. How do you stay positive? One of the questions that I like is very much, how do you stay positive through all that you have witnessed?
Oh, I'm not positive. Like, I just have a really weird sense of humor. And yeah, I'm not, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as, a positive person. I mean, look, yeah, like sometimes I struggle to get out of bed. I'm like, what's the point? And then, I remember, not to sound, tacky or cliche, but yeah, I remember what matters. And you know what? It's like, Arwa, this is not about you. Get out of bed, get your act together, because, these kids are relying on you. You need to go out and do this story. And then the other thing also, again, this comes, with experience over the years, is I used to struggle a lot after an assignment to laugh and smile and allow myself to feel good. It was almost like I couldn't. It was like there was this barrier there of, how dare you enjoy life when you just flew out of this nightmare. And that's not to say that I'm entirely successful at it right now, but I've become a bit better at allowing myself to enjoy certain moments and try to, like, I wouldn't necessarily want to stop being the way I am, because that feeling of not doing enough is what drives me and what keeps me fighting, and I don't want to lose that. but I've also been able to shift, especially in the last few years, and maybe it's the being over 40 thing, but shift from, feeling guilt for what I have to feeling gratitude and recognizing that if I don't start to take care of myself, I'm not going to be able to do everything it is that I'm trying to do. Oh, and I got 3 cats, and now I have 1 kitten that doesn't have a leg because it got crushed in a car. So they make me laugh.
Oh, no.
I mean, not the fact that it was crushed by a car, but, the cats make me laugh.
They are wonderful company.
Yes. Yes, I am the crazy cat lady.
You talk about gratitude. What are you grateful for?
Oh, God, everything. I am grateful that I have running water. I am grateful that I have a roof over my head. I am grateful that I had the privilege of being raised by, bicultural parents and grew up all over the world, and that they gave me the tools of being multilingual that then allowed me to build my career. I'm eternally grateful to, my family for their patience and staying with me. I mean, literally everything. And I think, that's the thing is, I don't know actually if it's just me or if a lot of us actually feel this way, but I am very highly sensitive to the fact that everything I do, there's someone who can't do that.
No, I think gratitude is such a powerful emotion. If emotion is the right word for it, you put things into perspective, into context. And especially for someone like yourself who have seen probably more things that we would see in our lifetimes, that ability to feel grateful and have gratitude, put things into perspective for you. I used to work a lot with young people, and one of the questions is really about if young people really want to become a journalist like you, what advice would you give? What would that be?
So if you want to do what I do, my main advice is be ready to give up a part of yourself you won't get back, and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. And for you, what part was it that you gave up?
It's something that's quite hard to, fully articulate, but a part of you does stay with, every story. Mm. That you report on with every person who you meet. It eats away at you, and you lose that. You lose a bit of that. You do lose a bit of, carefree, go lucky attitude. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not, this horrible dark person. I mean, I am a little bit, but I'm a bit funny about it. I think I'm funny.
We think you're funny. We think you're positive. So,
but it will take a lot from you. And you need to know your limits. Oh, and here's another thing that's very important. Don't think that I'm not fearless. I feel fear. And the thing is if you try to do what I'm doing and you don't feel fear, you need to stop doing it, because fear is what is going to keep you alive. And what I mean by that is, I'm not talking, overwhelming fear that's going to make you turn around and, run into the middle of a firefight, but, or do something irrational. You need to feel fear, that sort of fear that's the pit in your stomach that keeps you alert, that keeps you aware, because that is what is going to keep you alive. And you need to know your limits. If you feel like you can't handle something, you need to turn around and tell whoever it is that you're with, I can't do this, because you will get into so much trouble and potentially deadly trouble if you go into a situation that you can't handle, because that's how mistakes are made. Because look, a lot of the places that we go to, yes, CNN is very security conscious. Yes, we try to mitigate all the risks, but let's face it, a lot of the times it's unforeseen circumstances. It's risk that you can't control or manage, no matter how hard you try.
How does that apply to 2020? I like that advice that having the fear keeps you alive to a certain extent, especially the kind of job that you're doing. But if I bring it to current context, right? Majority of us on this call are not going to experience a tenth of what you've experienced. But 2020 has become a really unique year for many in different contexts. A lot of young people may feel really pessimistic. What has your years of experience as a journalist and seeing the different things, put 2020 in context, what will you say?
So it was quite interesting, actually, because I was talking about this with a couple of my journalist friends. And, coronavirus, shook people's reality, right? Outside, all of a sudden, is not safe. These things that, a lot of people took for granted as being safe were all of a sudden dangerous. And no one really knew back then, especially, in the first weeks of it. But even now, we don't really know exactly, what is going on with COVID. What are the real, ways to protect yourself? What needs to happen? At first, the advice was no mask. Then it was wear a mask. At first, it was this, it was that. So it was very people's realities were really shaken to the very core. And for us, it was quite interesting because we are used to living with uncertainty in the context of the war zone. So you go into a war zone and, the logic goes something like this, although a lot of times, you plan as best you can, and then it all goes out the window. But basically, you know what your risks are, right? And so you plan to be able to mitigate those risks. But then there's this whole existence over here that is the unforeseen, the unpredictable, the unknown. And there is nothing that we can do about that. And so the way that you psychologically kind of handle it is really focusing in on what can I control and how do I best control it and protect myself. And so we are quite used to living like that. But obviously the vast majority of, people are not. And so, in some ways, because we're used to living like that, we were perhaps better, mentally equipped to deal with the uncertainty that COVID brought about. But I think right now what we're seeing is across populations, people having to live with that. And, in some ways, it's tragically fascinating, but to kind of see this sort of global psychological shift that normally you see in a much smaller context. I mean, it's quite striking how quickly people actually readjust their sense of what is normal. And now we're seeing that happening on a global level.
The only hope is what you talked about in the change in conflict, the devaluing of human life is not going to be that new normal for us in this COVID time, where 200,000 deaths in the US, all of a sudden becoming, it's just 200,000 deaths. And that's 1 million worldwide. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest worry. Hey, Arwa, I time just fly past so quickly, and I just realized that we're actually running out of time, and I really want to end by asking you are a correspondent, you interview people for a living in different arenas and different countries. Is there a question that you wish someone asked you but never did? What would that be?
It would probably be something along the lines of, when you're in these situations, what's the one thing you wish for the most?
So what's the one thing you wish for the most? Thank you for doing my homework for me.
Yeah, you know what it is, actually? I mean, because in so many of these situations, right? So we go through these crazy experiences, you know, with people whose life it actually is like, and, you know, there's all these intense emotions and there's tragedy and horror. And yet there's these bizarrely uplifting moments too, you know, like the guy that made the fried eggs, or like, you know, the same situation. You know, we're in a different house because the first one we were with was the guy who did the fried eggs. The front lines got too close, and we had to run out of it, and gunfire. So we're in this other house. And there's kind of the matriarch of the family who like semi-adopts me. But of course, the second I walk in there, and I'm like literally walking into a room of terrified women. And this is why I love being a female on the front line, because I can hang out with the men, hang out with the women. Anyways, I walk in there and this matriarch's like, "You're so skinny." I'm like, "Excuse me? Hi, I'm Arwa." And she's like, "Habibti, come here. I'm going to take care of you. Come here." And then I start brushing my hair. There's bombing going on outside, by the way. And she's like, come, sleep on my chest. It's okay. It's so hilarious. I mean, literally like side-splitting laughter. I mean, she's half joking, I'm joking, you know, that whole kind of thing. But what I really wish I could do is just transport people. Like if I could just transport all of you right now into 5 minutes of some of these experiences, you would get it. You would understand so much more. And I think that's what's so frustrating, because in the journalism, we try to make people understand. And, you know, sometimes we succeed more than others, but there's so many of these moments that kind of happen on the sidelines where the cameras don't capture it, or where it's just that moment. I mean, there's laughter that happens, there's tenderness, there's kindness. And if I could just put you there in that context while all this violence is happening that dominates the headlines, and you saw that, you would get it.
That would be such a wonderful opportunity. Teleportation, we need teleportation.
Yeah, so basically I want teleportation. Could you sort that out for me?
I will try. We're going very hard in increasing our technology breakthroughs in Singapore. We will try teleportation. in absence of teleportation, there is a question, and I thought it'd be good. All these stories that you talk about, and all these ladies, the time that you want to transport people, in absence of teleportation, would you be writing a book? Would you be writing a autobiography? Tell us about it.
Probably, you know what? Yeah, I used to answer no to that question. And now I answer probably, but not yet. I personally think it's too early in my personal development to want to write a book that's kind of about my experiences. I feel as though I have more to learn about life before I would be ready to write a book, because I wouldn't want to write a book that's about my experiences as much as it is about, you know, the people I've met and how they've, you know, impacted me, but also just how, I mean, I meet some extraordinary people, but I feel as if I still have more to learn before I would be ready to kind of give that back in that kind of context.
I tell you what, one book that I would love to read, and it's the stories that you just told. That stories that we don't see. It's not on the news. It's the experience that you have. It's not the important people. It's not the rebel people. If it's just a collection of all those humane stories that brings light to people, that would be a wonderful book to read, because those are your experiences and no one can take that. Hey, Arwa, if people do want to donate, I know you've made it, you didn't want to make this like a fundraising pitch, but you know, in the 1 minute that we have left, if we as a group could do something, and if we can donate, how should we do it?
Yes, I mean, look, please give us money. We're about to go broke. We will figure it out. I am not going to stop fighting for these kids. However, you know, the best way to do it is online. Our website is www.inara.org, so INARA.org. There's a donate button there. The most useful way for us actually is for people to do monthly donations, because then we know more or less what we're getting in, from our online platform monthly. So we're able to better plan and budget. Just to give you a rough idea, it's not that expensive to change a child's life. So our average surgeries run around, give or take, $4,000. And a lot of our kids, you would have noticed in that video though, they haven't cycled out of our program because a lot of the sorts of injuries that we treat they need multiple surgeries over the years. And also, we're filling in a niche. So things like, burst eardrums because of explosions, shrapnel in the eye, so we're taking the cases other organizations aren't. So if we're not there to step in, these kids aren't going to get treatment. And you do make a difference, and we can connect you with these kids, and you can read their stories, and you can follow their progress. And it's beautiful to see how they change.
I just love when you talk about it, how, when you're talking about the light that shines in the kid's eye, the light up in the eyes of the kids. That's what you are right now when you talk about the work that you do. It's just that. Yeah, you get that, right? And it just come across. Arwa, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending an hour and a half with us. It has been a real honor for me. And on behalf of Straits Clan, thank you for spending your evening
you.
with us.
I had a great time. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone who joined, who participated. Thank you so much. And hopefully I'll make it out there in person.
Please do. And for everyone, thank you for joining us tonight with Arwa Damon. I hope you've enjoyed the session as much as I did. Please go on to inara.org, INARA.org. It's already in the chat. If you can just click on the link, do what we can. And I think what Arwa said is right. It's not the big things that matter, even though they are, but it's really the small acts of kindness that we do on an everyday basis. So stay safe, stay strong. Thank you very much, and have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.